Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Hi, and welcome back to this week's Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand. I'm joined this week by Zach Semke. How you going?
I'm well. Thank you, Matthew.
And we've also got Mary James with us. How are you doing, Mary?
Very well, thanks.
And Jay Fox is back. Good to see you, Jay.
Good to see you as well. Happy to be here.
And Jay and Mary, you had a conversation with our guest that we're going to be featuring this week, Tonje, who is the executive director of long-term recovery, the long-term recovery group of Santa Cruz County, and we'll get into that because it's a great deep dive into that long tail of recovery from a disaster, which often gets forgotten about, and then getting into some of the details and how Passive House often ends up as the solution to a lot of problems. In this case, probably a little bit unexpectedly. So looking forward to cracking into that. But before we do, Zach, we've got a few people to thank.
Indeed. So I want to thank Innotech Windows and Doors for being our sponsor of the week at Passive House Accelerator, so making all of our programming here at the Accelerator possible. I'd also like to thank our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Ingui Architecture, Partel, Rockwell North America, and Zola Windows. And thank you to our champion sponsors, Buizo, Cascadia Windows and Doors, European Architectural Supply, Facro, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, LG Air Conditioning Technologies, and Source 2050.
Awesome. Now looking at Tonje's profile, she's very busy and obviously a very community-orientated person with a lot of the activities that she's doing and has been involved with. But a little bit more context, Mary or Jay, how did you first come across Tonje in the first place?
Well, I first met her because I went to see the build with B public panels that was going up in Santa Cruz, which isn't that far from where I live. So, and I was excited to see it happening. It went up really quickly, as anybody who's seen one of those installs can attest. So yeah, that's where I met her.
And we've talked to B Public and featured a lot of their work on the show before and on the Accelerator, so people should definitely check that out. If you don't know what we're talking about, have a look for B Public Prefab. And well, let's get into it, and then we'll have a quick catch up afterwards because there's some great stuff that you cover in this interview. So here is your conversation with Tonje Wold-Switzer.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast. I'm here today with Tonje Wold-Switzer and Jay Fox as co-host. And we're excited to talk with Tonje about the long-term recovery group and about fire resiliency in Santa Cruz County. Tonje, can you tell us about what the long-term recovery group does and how you came to be executive director?
Yes, so as we lost our home in the 2020 CCU lightning complex fire here in Santa Cruz County. And let me back up. So the long-term, if you Google long-term recovery group, you'll find them all over the country. A long-term recovery group stands up after a major disaster and supports the coordination of recovery efforts in that either immediate area or often county. And that's what happened in Santa Cruz. So we had our massive fire in 2020. We lost 911 homes in that fire, and it was a major event that we needed to coordinate across national and state and local organizations and partners that came together to support the recovery efforts. So that's what long-term recovery groups generally do. At the time of the disaster, I was working as the operations manager for one of two nonprofit organizations in Santa Cruz County that does disaster case management work that ended up being the disaster case management organizations. And as I was already working there before Community Bridges became a disaster case management organization, it's one of the largest human services agencies in Santa Cruz County. And I was working out of a program that's called Mountain Community Resources, which is very adjacent to the burn scar. And because of my connection with human services already, when we lost our home, it was a very easy stretch for me to take my experience in working in social services and say, this is something that has affected the community that I live in. Let's apply the skills that I have to that disaster. And so very early on, before we had a disaster case management program, I was managing a local laundry unit, for example, that we were driving into the burn scars so people that had lost everything and or people that were smoke impacted could come in and wash their things. We'd organize distribution events, those kind of events. And then I was part of starting the disaster case management program at Community Bridges. And that's how I got involved with the long-term recovery group back then it was stood up in 2021 and ended up on the steering committee of the long-term recovery group. There was since we were not a nonprofit organization at the time, and so that comes with some restrictions in terms of the inability to hire staff and the inability to go after funding ourselves, apply for grants and funding. And so in 2020, the steering committee, which I at that point was a part of, decided to make it into a nonprofit organization, which we did. And so we became a nonprofit organization early in 2023. I was asked to step down from my position on the board or the steering committee in the fall of 2023, and I was hired as executive director in November 2023. And have been in that position since then. In this last summer, so summer of 2024, we hired a construction project manager who's a general contractor, and we hired a program coordinator in September. And so building the staff and building our capacity. And we launched in the fall of 2024, we launched our volunteer rebuild program, which has been one of the sort of ideas that we had, one of the programs that we wanted to build, where we needed the staff and the capacity to do so. So that's one of the culminating effects of becoming a nonprofit and getting funding and staff.
Very cool. So I'm curious of the 911 homes that were lost. And just for clarity's sake, I'm currently in Asheville, so I have seen natural disaster, what it can do and how long it can take to even start to get your bearings again. And I'm just curious, how many homes have been rebuilt and how many homes are currently under construction and being rebuilt?
So looking at where the recovery efforts are currently, we have 2 completed single-family dwelling units and 144 active single-family dwelling unit permits, meaning buildings that are somewhere between having plans submitted and approved for building all the way up to close to final certificate of occupancy. So if you add those 2 together, we're looking at 286 homes that are either completed or built in some process of rebuilding. What we also have is we have around 50, and I'm not going to pull up the spreadsheet, but there are roughly 50 homes in a CNC category that's conditionally not cleared. So we have some issues in Santa Cruz County. We have a lot of the properties are on septic. And so we have environmental health clearance as part of the pre-clearance process, and potable drinking water, clean drinking water, and sanitation is part of that. And so in some instances, septic tanks were damaged or not up to code, and so that can add a significant cost that can blow budgets out of proportion. We also have CAL FIRE requirements, meaning that if you live on a narrow road without turnouts that is further than its private road, that is further than 1 mile from the last turnout, or it's basically has to do with emergency vehicles being able to come in and out and fight the fires if there's another fire coming through. You can't get CAL FIRE clearances, so that's hindering a lot of people. And then you have geological hazards. So we live in an area with there's debris flow danger here, and that's exacerbated from having a fire, and so that's also preventing people. So in that category of 50, around 50 conditionally not cleared, you're going to have families that fall into one or more of those categories. Some of them fall into all three of them. And so they have a difficulty to even get to the point where they can submit plans for permits. And then you have another category of, again, roughly 50 that have submitted and have submitted plans for permits but have not started building, and then or is somewhere along the way of building but have stalled out. And then we have another category of, again, roughly 50 that have passed the pre-clearances but have not submitted plans for permits. So and everyone outside of that haven't even been in touch with the planning department. Or actually there's 250 people that have sold their properties. So when you add that up, you find the number of people that haven't even been in touch with the planning department for pre-clearances or other things. So
you get a sense of what a huge impact there is on this community.
yes, and how much work is left to be done. Yeah.
And when it's almost 5 years after the fire. And we're going to get back in a bit to talking about your home and your rebuild process, but I'm curious, I know you use prefabricated assemblies as part of your rebuild process. And so I'm just curious, are any of the other ones using prefabricated assemblies or aiming for high performance?
So any of the other people that have rebuilt in Santa Cruz County? So we have 3 that I know of went with a passive house, SIPS panel, passive house construction, but that's all I know of. It is something that we would like to change, and we'd like to be part of the education process on that, where the anecdotal data is really starting to add up on passive house construction, and not only the energy efficiency, which we're well familiar with already, but also the fire resistance of those buildings, and then the capability of withstanding wildfire when it comes through. For us, it's a matter of when, not if, we're going to have another wildfire. Even though we had a massive one, there's still so many acres of land that is really just sitting there waiting to burn, and being in sort of perpetual drought exacerbates that. I think what we can do now is to prepare for that and build as resilient as possible, and defensible space is a big part of that, but also having housing envelopes that are able to withstand the fire if it comes close is crucial.
Great. And I guess now switching back to your own experience and your kind of decision after you lost your home, what were some of the decisions that you made early on in terms of what direction you wanted to take in terms of how the house would be built, and how long did the whole design build process end up taking?
Yeah, when our house burned down in August of 2020, we really didn't have a choice but to rebuild. We had just purchased our home. We closed on our home in April, and our house burned down in August. And while that is, I know you can't see this on the air, but I see the facial expressions, right? That's horrible. And while that is horrible, it's a different experience than neighbors of ours that built their homes 40 years ago and had 40 years to create attachments to that home. We didn't have that. So in some senses, I think it was an easier process for us. And again, I'm saying this from a personal point of view. I'm not talking for others who may have been in the same situation. The impact of wildfire on the recovery process is never linear, and it doesn't look the same for anyone. And so everyone is entitled to their own experience and their own process through that. But for us, because we had just purchased the property and the home on it, we would have lost our investment had we walked away. And so for us, because of that, there wasn't really an option not to rebuild. We were also fortunate that our insurance was up to date because we had just purchased. And so there was not quite enough to build with, but enough for us to make the decision fairly quickly that we wanted to build. Fire trauma definitely had an impact on the type of home that we built. We did not want to build a home that was going to burn down again if another wildfire came through. And so we started looking into sort of fire resilient design very early on, and also something that would go up quickly. So that was important to us. So we started looking into SIPS panels. We didn't have any experience. We'd never asked for the opportunity to build a house before. So it was thrown at us, and we did a lot of research, and we found SIPS panels, which would allow us to architecturally design our house, which we wanted to do. We didn't want to buy a cookie cutter that was plopped down. We wanted to be able to get a design that we were comfortable with. And so SIPS panels seem to bridge those two realities. And we went with one company that designed our home, and we realized that they were using foam for insulation in their SIPS panels, and we did not want to use foam. We were very concerned about the potential of our house burning down again and then leaving another sort of toxic ash pile or debris pile, and wanted to also mitigate that as much as possible. We're very conscious about the toxic chemicals and other parts of the debris that had been flowing into the ground when it rained. We were up there covering our debris pile with tarps and trying to mitigate as much as possible. Even did oyster mushroom inoculated wattles around our property and had a big workshop up there to mitigate the toxicity. And so that was a big factor for us in switching then to another company. And so we switched to a company called Be Public, and they use cellulose as insulation in their SIPS panels. They're also a company that is specifically working on passive houses. And so that's how we were looking for a better installation type. We found that Be Public was doing cellulose, and then we stumbled upon passive house because of that. And so this has been vertical. It was a vertical learning curve into passive house design because out of necessity and out of sort of a care for the earth and wanting to avoid having our home contribute to further environmental degradation of our neighborhood.
Cool. That's a really interesting pathway into passive house design. I think that might be one of the more unique ones I've ever heard. And also good to know about the oyster mushroom thing. That's the first I've ever heard of that, but that's a brilliant idea.
Yeah, we have a local nonprofit, actually. It's called Core Renewal that our organization, Long-Term Recovery Group, is collaborating with, that is looking at inoculation of wattles. And now we're looking at a project, possibly collaborating on a project with hugel culture beds, modified hugel culture, that will also be inoculated to support both wildfire mitigation, and soil post-fire soil restoration. So yeah. I'll put you in contact if you want to learn more about that.
Yeah, I would be interested in hearing more about that. And also, I know you're going to be speaking at our upcoming fire resiliency conference, and I'm sure you're going to be talking about the fire hardening measures that you took there. I would love to hear about what aspects of your home you thought about in terms of fire resilience. And I'm also really interested in ongoing maintenance of any fire resiliency features that you have built into your house or your property.
Yeah, beyond the passive house design of our house, which has triple pane windows and the passive house certified doors, which close like their refrigerator doors, so it keeps It doesn't have any soffits where embers can get in. So there's multiple aspects of a passive house itself that make it more wildfire resilient. In addition to that, we clad our house in hardy board, which is cement board, which adds to that. We have a flat roof, which has, and I should look up what that is called, but it has a fire resilient material on it. We would have loved to go with metal. It was cost prohibitive for us, so we found a cheaper material that we could utilize that was still fire resilient, and has that wildfire resiliency rating that we wanted. We have cement deck on the back and cement decking on the front. We are meticulous in keeping our home ignition zone clear for vegetation, and because of the fire we lost the majority of the vegetation right around our property, and so maintaining it, because we're able-bodied and we can do it, it is not a hardship for us. It will be for others that are seniors and on low-income seniors, for example, that don't have the capacity of paying for somebody to come in and help with that. But we're planting trees again, but we're making sure that they stay outside of the home ignition zone. So there's the 5 feet right next to your home, right? And then you have the 30 next feet, and then you have up to 100 feet, and you want to be conscious about what you plant in those areas. We have decomposed granite on the back of our house too, which is butting up against the hillside that comes up, because we know that fire travels upwards, and it is a holistic view where we consider, if the fire comes back, where would it likely come from, and then we work specifically in those areas to make sure that those are as resilient as possible.
That I have been thinking about lately is that people, just the ongoing attention that maintaining the resiliency of your property requires. And sometimes that doesn't get as much attention, of course, because it's minor compared to getting your home designed and or retrofitted to be more fire resilient, but it does require a lot of ongoing efforts.
Yes, and I think so. We're a Firewise neighborhood, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's part of the Fire Safe Council we have a Fire Safe Council in Santa Cruz County. A lot of counties have them, who support the organization of Fire Safe Neighborhoods, who come together and support each other in clearing properties, right? And so if we have neighbors that need extra support in clearing their properties because they can't do it and they want the help, then we do that, and we clear the roadways back as far as we can. The sort of the setbacks from the roadways we were allowed to clear without property owners' permission. And there's a lot of things that can be done on the community level as well, by grassroots community organizing and neighbors supporting neighbors. Yeah.
That's really cool. I'm curious, just speaking about some of the other neighbors, have they had any difficulties in obtaining insurance in the aftermath, or have most people been able to get some plan? It might not be affordable, but is the option at least there?
A lot of people, whether they lost their homes or not in the fire, are having difficulty maintaining insurance. So a lot of people their insurance has been discontinued. And then the California FAIR plan is what is left as an option for them in many instances, which is unaffordable, and it doesn't cover as much. So that is a challenge. United Policyholders is a great organization. So for anyone who finds themselves in this debacle and is listening to this, I would recommend contacting them and asking them to come to your community and giving a presentation. They have a lot of good insights in what you can do if you get the discontinued letter from your insurance company. They are supposed to let you know why they are discontinuing you and what you can do, what they would like to see. And they give you a certain amount of time to correct action. And so there are things that people can do. Also, shopping around, and not just with the big entities. There are lots of insurance companies in California. It's not just the big ones that we all know the name of. There's also smaller entities. So we've been very fortunate to maintain insurance. Our original, the ones we were insured with when the fire came through, dropped us. But because my partner's father is a veteran and a member of USAA, we were able to sign on with them. And so I always ask people, do you have somebody who's a veteran in your family? And if so, try USAA because they're still signing in some areas. But I also know others that have been denied by them. So it really depends. Being a fire safe neighborhood can help. There's more and more sort of models coming out where they will look at your home from a satellite image and see what it looks like, and that is part of the determination of whether or not they will insure you. The creation of defensible space is definitely important in this aspect, and I hope that we will see in the near future that passive house will also be part of this, so that if you have a passive house in your defensible space, you'll be likely to be insured because the data is there, right? I think we need some scientific research to go in and be interested in passive house and actually tally up the data, but the anecdotal data is definitely there, that time after time we see that the passive house is what still stands after a fire has gone through.
And are there any other measures that we haven't addressed yet that local governments or homeowners can take to try to minimize fire risk in your areas? Are there lessons that you've learned from this whole recovery process that you've been involved in that you think are really important for people to hear?
I think upstream funding for programs like fire safe councils that do important work in the community to mitigate wildfires. We have the Resource Conservation District is another one who does fire mitigation work or educates people on road and erosion and things like that. There's funding is really where it's at, right? You need to fund these organizations ahead of time so that they can help the prevention and mitigation work, and then you need organizations like ours who come in and support after a devastating event, that support the rebuilding efforts as well. Yeah.
In my area, because I also live in California, one of the measures that I think is really tricky question is any enforcement ability. And I wonder if that's an issue that's come up at all. People in your community who may not be interested in any sort of vegetation management or fire resiliency efforts. Is that an issue that's come up at all?
Yes, I think that's where the social services part of me comes in, right? And so sure, you may have the odd one out who, of community members who's not interested, even though they are capable. But I think in most cases, you're going to find people that are low income, possibly families with children working several jobs. Everybody's working out of the house who don't have the time or money to pay somebody else. They don't have the time to do it themselves. They don't have the money to pay somebody else to do it for them. And same goes for seniors on a fixed income. And so with enforcement, there also needs to be programs that support the mitigation efforts, right? So then you need to have, maybe that's Fire Safe Council, maybe that's part of a different volunteer organizing program like ourselves that can go out and support families that are unable to do it on their own to mitigate fire on their properties, and by extension then securing larger swaths of the communities and neighborhoods. Education is a big part of that, and so we do need to have trusted messengers in the community that are explaining what a safe home ignition zone looks like. Fire Safe Council in Santa Cruz County is doing a great job with that. They have a home ignition zone assessment program with volunteers that go out and per request tells people they go out and assess properties and tell people what they should be doing to make their homes more fire resilient. Again, there's no enforcement. It's completely anonymous, and so they don't report that to anyone. But if we had something to back that up, where as part of that assessment, there is also an income eligibility component, for example, where then if somebody is assessed, they're found income eligible, then there can be a team of volunteers to come out and actually help them do the work. I think that's what's lacking. We don't have that.
Yeah, that seems exactly what's needed because as you said, you mentioned briefly that sometimes you're able to clear brush from roads where maybe you don't have permission specifically to do that, but it's okay for you to do that. But we should probably get back a little bit to design measures of the homes that are being rebuilt. And I wonder, if you're aware of the fire resiliency of the homes that are being rebuilt, is Santa Cruz County checking that as part of the permit process?
Yeah, so there's WUI code or Wildland Urban Interface code now that needs to be in place. And so that includes the size of the mesh on the soffits, for example. It's the type of siding that is allowed, it's the type of decking that is allowed. So there's roofing, so it has to be a certain grade roofing. So there are measures that are built into the planning process. You cannot do whatever you want right now, but it certainly doesn't rise to the level of passive house certification. And I think that will probably remain an option, but I think there's a lot of education that could go into that. And it's when it comes to passive house, it's really a cost benefit analysis for homeowners that are also trying to rebuild and making that economically attainable and pair that with education of the benefits, I think is where it's at. In California right now, the California Energy Commission has an incentive program that is pushed out through Rise Homes is the consultant. It's up to $45,000 for building all electric passive houses as disaster rebuilds in California. It's coming. It's on the launching pad. It's paused a little bit, but we're expecting that to come out very soon. And that is one of the reasons why we are now looking to passive houses as part of our volunteer rebuild program. And we're working with architects right now to get some quotes on what it would cost to to build passive houses instead of regular stick builds as volunteer rebuilds for those most vulnerable families that we're building for, to move the needle in the right direction, both within our own fire recovery community and also within the sort of volunteer rebuild landscape at large, because there are multiple organizations nationwide that comes in with volunteers and build homes for families in disaster impacted areas. And we want to try to create a local program that can help educate and incentivize a shift in thinking about how do we create disaster rebuilds, volunteer built disaster rebuilds more resilient overall. I took that a little bit of a different direction than what you were actually asking for, I think.
No, that's really great. Hadn't heard about these incentives that you mentioned. So you say that's
it's on the runway. Yes. Yeah, it was supposed to launch about a month ago and it was paused, but apparently they've cut all the red tape already. I can't go into details about the program because it hasn't been officially launched yet, but they've been in contact with stakeholders since I joined the conversation back in the fall of last year or summer of last year. I think July is when I joined a stakeholder call for organizations that would be pushing this out with their constituents. Yeah, we're collaborating closely with them.
Is there a lot of interest in prefab by any chance, or are most people following stick built and trying to build on site? Or has your example not, I was about to use a terrible pun, so I'm going to stop because Spark's probably not the best.
I want to hear your terrible pun.
I was going to say, did it spark interest, but.
Oh, I see.
No, but just using prefab, because I know there's a bit of stigma around prefab because people think of it as manufactured homes and in trailers, and it's not a glamorous thing. But I think companies like Be Public are definitely changing that perception. And if somebody can see, holy, this came in, it went up so quickly. Was there interest after you put your home up?
So we had two open houses during the same week during the install of our house, specifically because we wanted to spur interest in building prefab SIPS panel, specifically passive house, right? But any type of SIPS panels as a way of building back quickly and more economically. Two other SIPS panel homes that I know of went up in our community, and both of them were as a result of us promoting it in the community. But I don't know if it went any further than that, unfortunately. I think definitely hear a lot of people who's wanting to build exactly what they had if they're able to, and I understand that sentiment. And I think you're right, there is a level of stigma to prefab as a building method, since people think that it's lower quality, and so there's education that needs to be done in the community to promote prefab as architectural design prefab. So there's a little different. You have prefabs that are boxes that come in, and you don't have much say in where your windows and your doors and the layout of the home. But it's important to get the word out there that prefab is so much more than that, and that technology has come so far that you can have an architecturally designed prefab home that is more sustainable and more energy resilient and wildfire resilient than a regular home, and you can have a lot of freedom in how that is designed. So education is key there.
And I wanted to hear just a little more about your volunteer rebuild efforts that your organization is doing, because you mentioned it, but I'd like to hear a little more about how that's going and how many families are involved in that.
Yeah, so currently I just came back from the field. Actually, I was out with a coffee pot and some pastries this morning to appreciate our volunteers who are out clearing a lot that we are preparing for building on. That's one build that we're doing from the ground up very soon. We got the plans back with comments. We're addressing those comments, and we're hoping to resubmit early next week. We also have volunteers at a different home where the homeowner ran out of funding. So they started their rebuild, and at a certain point realized that they did not have enough to finish their build. That's a regular stick build. It's bigger than what we would build from the ground up. What we will build from the ground up is modest, very basic homes. And that is partially because it's very budget constrained for the clients that we work with. And also because that is what any potential national partners or other volunteer partners are going to be wanting to come and build. They're not going to pull people from their churches to come and build in our community if we're building luxury homes, and we're keeping it very basic. But yeah, so we have a few under our belt now where we've gone in and done some. We also do storm repairs. So we had 2 federally declared disasters in 2023 with atmospheric rivers and bomb cyclones coming through our county, and that was countywide, north to south, east to west. And so there's a lot of storm repairs to be done as well. So we have a few of those under our belt. We have the home that came in, and we're bringing the budget back into balance by infusing volunteers wherever we can. And then we have the one where we're preparing the ground now for foundation to go in within the next month. But we also have multiple families in the pipeline for building for, and so they're currently going through disaster case management so that we can do financial assessment to make sure they're eligible for our program, and also assess the need for funding and apply for funding for those builds. And we are hoping that some of the builds that we're not in active construction or active construction preparation for, that those will be built as passive houses. So that's why we're now working with several architects to get bids on going from A to C on that project, where we can get plans ready for submitting, and then we'll come in with volunteers and build them. We're also hoping that in terms of that passive house model, that will be an educational opportunity. So we will invite other entities that do volunteer rebuilds and local contractors to come out and learn alongside us as we start erecting those homes.
A question occurred to me that you have these properties that got cleared out by the fire, and then there's these torrential rainstorms coming through that produces landslides and other issues. What are some of the ways that you're actually building like the foundation on these properties to try to stabilize, to make sure, or are you planning things, building retaining walls? What are you doing to hopefully prevent against landslides while the land repairs itself?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one of biggest, most expensive line items of our budgets is foundation. And so on the property that we're clearing now and ready for foundation, the foundation costs over $70,000. And yes, and so that's not uncommon. And a lot of these properties, like we have the pre-clearance process, and geological hazards is part of that. And so some properties will need a fortified foundation and a debris flow mitigation wall, which will blow budgets out of proportion. And so we are seeing some families that they may even have had enough insurance to build something at least. But because of that issue, they are using up to half of their insurance proceeds on the debris flow mitigation, not leaving them enough. And that's where we can come in and say, okay, if you can do that, get through the pre-clearance process, and then with the remaining funds, with us coming in with volunteer labor, we should be able to help you to complete the build. We're seeing some of those cases as well, where we'll be able to mitigate that by volunteer labor. But it's a big issue in our mountains for sure.
And I can imagine that we had atmospheric rivers here this winter. Did that exacerbate problems there?
Yeah, so we had a big storm come through mid-December, and we have one home that we're hoping to bring in volunteers to demolish. Actually, unfortunately, a massive tree fell on it, and it's destroyed. And so we had a storm surge, and we have one client now that was living in their sailboats in the harbor, and their boat sank. It's an ongoing struggle. We see new cases each year, and especially when there's singular incidents like that, and it doesn't rise to the scale of a federally declared disaster. There's much less resources available as well, because FEMA and SBA is not available to those clients. And so it really becomes a question of, is there any funding available locally that could be applied towards supporting this family in recovering?
And finally, I just wanted to hear if you had any comments about how your house, the comfort of your house, because it's been a year and a half since I talked to you. How has it been?
It's been fantastic. We love our house so much. We moved in the tail end of June of 2022. So come this June, we've been in for 3 years. And it's now been a while, and we've really had time to settle in, and it feels like home now. And it's just fantastic. I'm going to talk about our pond for a little bit. So we dug a small pond, and so we have our water filtration system feeds into the pond because it has to flush every 24 hours. We're on the well. Has some sediments in it that we have to have a water filtration. So anyway, all of that said, that we've attracted some frogs, which we love, and they're loud. You walk outside and it's all over the place, like loudly at night. And it's always surprising to open that door because it's so quiet inside, right? It's just quiet and peaceful. And then I open the door and there's like really loud frogs out there. So that just like illustrates to us, because we live in a pretty quiet neighborhood. And so you don't really get the sense of the quietness of the house. But man, after it rains and those frogs come back, we really understand how well sealed it is and how quiet it is. I think that's the main thing that we notice inside, but it's also the air quality is wonderful. We have a HEPA filter on our ERV, our energy recovery ventilation system, and it's good to know. We haven't had a major smoke event, but we will. We know we will when there's another wildfire in our area, even if it's a few counties away and there's drift smoke. And so just knowing that we will be able to go inside and close our door, and our air quality will be excellent inside our home, is a big comfort to us. So yeah, we love it. It's beautiful. It's very quiet. It feels very peaceful, and yeah, has excellent air quality.
It's just so great because as in so many communities in Santa Cruz, I know how challenging finding housing is. And in addition to that, having actually a really comfortable, energy efficient home is such a bonus. It's great to hear that. And thank you so much for all your work in long-term recovery, because sad as it is, there's a lot of communities being affected by disasters, and unfortunately that's doesn't seem like it's gonna be increasing.
Yeah, I say unfortunately, there seem to be job security for those that work in disaster recovery, right? Unfortunately, I wish it wasn't. But anyone that may hear this or may hear my presentation later, if anyone want to reach out and get in touch and collaborate or learn about what we're doing here and see how it can be applied to their own communities, then I am all ears. I thrive on creating connections, and I feel very fortunate that I've been able to pair my professional background with my personal experience to try to create some resiliency and forward thinking when it comes to how we build in Santa Cruz County.
And that was Tonje Wold-Switzer, who is currently Executive Director of the Long-Term Recovery Group in Santa Cruz County. Really great interview. I was struck first off the bat from listening to that, just about I mentioned at the top, the long tail of recovery, which is something that so often happens, whether it's people that are in a personal accident or a natural disaster. I know in my case, having experienced a pretty major earthquake, there's a lot of noise about that in the media initially, but then there's a very long process of recovering after that, which in the case of Christchurch is still ongoing for some people over a decade later. And I suspect the same is true for areas that have been affected by wildfires, that once the sort of media cycle ends, that doesn't mean that the recovery is finished, and there's a long process of rebuilding and redesigning, and I guess that's where people like Tonje are incredibly important, because that's where the community needs to come together and do the hard work over that long period of time. Mary, let's kick off with you. What were your takeaways from that chat?
Oh, just principally, so 911 homes burned. And as you were saying, it's a long tail. 286 homes are in the process, in some sort of process, either completed or being built, which, for a community, and I'm familiar with it, that needs housing so desperately, that's a small number, and yet not surprising. And just that there's so much we still don't know and are learning about how to respond to wildfires, after a big burn like this.
Yeah, it's sobering thinking that that's not just houses, that's families. 900 is it's a statistic, but behind that there's people involved with each of those houses, and probably families as well. So there's a lot of people displaced and certainly pretty majorly impacted by that, and other natural disasters, and other we're seeing more climate related natural disasters that are going to have similar impacts. Jay, how about you?
I found it very optimistic, and again, this is because I'm it's about 6 months off from my climate disaster. And there's still garbage that's in the tree limbs by the river. It still looks it's still fresh here. And to find out in 5 years that many houses have been rebuilt, and that the community, the group of volunteers that she built, is still actively participating in the cleanup and really helping out is good news, I think. That's so yeah, I took it that way, but that's because I'm kind of still in the midst of the medium term recovery, which is where things are starting to get cleaned up, but the rebuild hasn't really begun yet.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good take on it, Jay, and it is positive, and it's amazing to have people like Tonje doing this work and all the people that she's associated with. So really appreciate that. Zach, how about you?
Oh, well, I just want to let people know who may not know that Jay is in Asheville, North Carolina, where there was that massive flooding that happened in late October. Is that right? Early November, or late October?
Late September, early
Oh,
October.
late September. Okay. All right. Yeah. So yeah, pretty it's lots of these impacts
Close to
happening all
home.
over the place.
Yeah.
Well, I was really happy to hear about the $45,000 incentive for all electric passive house projects. So it sounds like that's imminent, and hopefully that will roll out very soon. It sounds similar to the incentive that is available in Colorado for the folks who are rebuilding after the Marshall Fire. And so hopefully there'll be some good uptake there. And I also really agreed with Tonje in her hope that we have somebody with some science, robust kind of scientific method to take interest in passive house and fire resilience. We do have all these anecdotes, which are really encouraging, and it would be great to see some data and see if we can see some statistical significance in these behind these stories of resilience.
Yeah, I thought about that, and I thought regardless of the resilience of the building staying up or resisting floods or fires, we do know, and you've experienced this yourself, Zach, and others who have been close to areas with smoke, that passive houses or just airtight houses with good ventilation systems and filtration are better places to be during these type of events. And that goes from being without power through to that air quality. So just being, the survivability or even just comfort during such an event. A house that is not going to let smoke and fumes and that sort of thing into the home, and enable people to shelter safely in place is hugely valuable. Even if the exterior does suffer some damage, that's a pretty important piece of that puzzle, is being able to shelter safely in place. And we do know that all of the things that contribute to a passive house make that a lot more likely and a lot more possible. So I was really interested how Tonje also came to the solution of a passive house, not through intention by the sound of how she described it, but when they were thinking about how they want to incorporate good design, but also make it affordable and have their buildings be resilient, they kind of naturally fell onto passive house. And it's amazing how often that happens, that passive house ends up popping up as a solution to a whole raft of problems. And then finally, for me, I take the point that she made, that there's plenty of job security in disaster recovery, which is a little bit scary, but it's certainly an unfortunately emerging area of that there will be more work required in disaster recovery. But I think if we can shift more and more of that to improving resilience, then that hopefully reduces the impact of those disasters in the first place. And that was something that she also talked about, is let's also build in a way that's going to reduce the ongoing impact, and otherwise we're just going to contribute to making some of these issues worse as we go.
Absolutely. And I should
Jay?
say that we're recording this the night before, or the day before, our big Reimagine Buildings conference called Designing for Fire Resilience, and Tonje is going to be a featured speaker at that event. So people who go to that conference and members of the Reimagine Buildings Collective can access the replay recordings and check out her presentation, which is sure to be excellent. Also, we have a great YouTube video on the Reimagine Buildings YouTube channel about Tonje's house, and you get to see it. It's very beautiful, and I'll hear more about her story.
Awesome. All right. So, Jay, Mary, anything else from Tonje you want to highlight?
Well, I just wanted to say that I thought her other motivation for going with Be Public, that if her house burned again, she didn't want to leave a toxic pile of ash, was a really great point, particularly given everything that we're reading about LA and the concerns there for the health of residents coming back to their house sites, you know, because of all the toxics in the soil. Are they removing enough? Are they, because they're not testing the soil afterwards. So I thought that was a really great point to remember, that while we're building these resilient passive houses, they may burn again, and, you know, thinking about what we put into them.
Yeah, I think we did touch on that a couple of weeks ago, didn't we? The issue of some of these high performance, and sometimes we're guilty of this. High performance homes have a lot of petrochemical products in them, and when they burn, it's kind of nasty. Whereas, you know, and that's the thing. And I had a quick look into the cellulose type of panels that Be Public use, and it's a lot of information about that on their website. They're very they promote a lot that use of I guess non-toxic materials and wood fiber and those sorts of things, which, yeah, like you say, if they do get burnt, or in worst case scenario, they're not going to be as problematic. And it's also much better at end of life. You know, they're sort of thinking more about that circularity as well, and the ease of being able to disassemble and then either decompose or do something useful with those materials at the end of their useful life. Jay, you got anything?
Mary stole my idea. So no,
Great
it's just
minds
it was
think alike.
in I think the Times, New York Times published an article about this in LA, you know, yesterday or this morning, I forget, about this problem with toxic chemicals after a fire. And so, yeah, it's top of mind for that reason.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not something necessarily new either. I mean, we're dealing with asbestos quite a lot, which is similar. You know, where people put things into a building, usually for good reason. It's often, you know, down the track, the next generation or whoever's got to deal with that product and think, you know, what were they thinking when they use this material? And it kind of does make you think about some of the materials that we're using today that might be a problem to deal with later on.
Yeah, so a good reason to use biomaterials. Still big fan of Savic up in Alberta. I thought that they were a really cool product when I got to speak with them.
Yeah, yeah. Very good. Hey, well, thanks for doing that interview. Really good stuff. And as we're finding more and more, it's relevant all over the world. I had very similar conversations just this week with a bunch of people looking at resilient design and maybe even certification of resilience, giving people checklists of that sort of thing for helping make buildings more fire resistant, also looking at flood-prone areas and inundation. So there's a lot of the same sort of thinking that's happening all over as well. So really keen to have some collaboration there, so we're not reinventing the wheel. All right, Zach, you mentioned a couple of events this week, but what else we got coming up?
So on the Passive House Accelerator Live this Wednesday, March 19th, we are joined by Michael Ingui, the founder of Passive House Accelerator, the co-founder of Source 2050, and president of Ingui Architecture. And he is going to be presenting at a construction tech edition of Passive House Accelerator Live. He'll be presenting Peeling Back the Layers of a Passive House Renovation. And this will be a pretty unique one because he'll be doing an on-site video tour of the project, and a presentation and questions and answers. So it's going to be a chance to really get geeky and look at the details of this beautiful, beautiful project. So then on the Reimagine Buildings Collective, we have the new Honeybee PH course by Ed May. This is your ultimate guide to using Honeybee PH within Rhino and Grasshopper. So those are all softwares to create powerful, accurate, and streamlined energy models. So this is using Honeybee PH, which Ed developed for passive house modeling. And we just opened the course, and the cohort is still open for folks who want to join. Just head on over to the Reimagine Buildings Collective, and you can access that. And then a regular feature at the collective are Ask Me Anything sessions with experts and residents. And this week we have a Ask Me Anything called Building Science and Passive House Engineering AMA with Christoph Irwin. And then on Friday, Retrofits and Embodied Carbon AMA with Tom Bassett-Dilley. So lots going on in the collective and at the accelerator and beyond. So head on over to Passive House Accelerator to find out more. We've got an event calendar there. And please do join the collective at reimaginebuildings.com.
Awesome. Yep, great stuff there. And you can find those links and other information resources, as always, on the Passive House Accelerator page as well. So definitely check that out. We'll be back again next week on the Passive House Podcast.